I'll be your companion around 2 hours. I know you got a really good hand. She's one of the experienced guides around, really, guys. Very famous around the world. So please, I'll be just. If you need anything to know, just do it. Okay, we're gonna try to chat a little bit about the things that you are really interested to know about this. Okay, thank you, please.
So here we have the profound Inca terracing system of the so-called Temple of the Sun, much higher quality, and that is a pre-Inca construction. The last two layers on top were made by the Inca, because this has never been restored. And again, here we have the refined pre-Inca work, and then the Inca work. And again, refined to not as fine. So the main function of this video is to show you the obvious difference between Inca period construction and pre-Inca. The pre-Inca is finer and is the megalithic. It's going to obviously show us that the Inca found this site called Machu Picchu, which means ancient mountain, and then they built around a megalithic core. The common story that you'll hear from archaeologists and from guides here is the finer work is the imperial Inca work, as in for the high-ranking people. But why do we find superior construction lower and inferior higher? Or why do we find profound construction in one spot and right next to it we find inferior? That doesn't make sense whatsoever.
Amazing feature among local villagers, guys. People can realize that as well. Okay?
Okay, good. So now you're going to see the most obvious difference between Inca and what came before. With an Inca repair above. Inca repair on top of the megalithic. Now the reason I'm saying Inca repair is because I ask the people who work here and the officials what has been restored and what has not been restored in modern times. And it's only the ones that have not been restored in modern times and are from the Inca time period that I'm looking at in terms of saying upper part, crude Inca, lower part, more profound, pre-Inca. Who were they? Maybe they were called the Pirwas. That's where Peru gets its name. We honestly don't know. But we do know that the Inca recognized that there were technologically more profound people than them who had been here in the very distant past. Okay, now that megalithic structure in behind me, I was here with an American geologist. I said, what caused the right wall to sink? She said, an earthquake somewhere between 9 and 9.5 on the Richter scale. And she said, if that building was contemporary with the rest of Machu Picchu, all of Machu Picchu would have been destroyed. So she said, that tells you that that structure is older than the rest of the Machu Picchu site. And this is the most complex stone at Machu Picchu. Look at the number of angles. So finally, we're going to see the most iconic thing at Machu Picchu, and that is this protrusion called the Intihuatana, which translates as meaning the hitching post of the sun. It's a calendar system. It wasn't simply used for the solstices and the equinoxes. It was probably used year-round because the most profound thing for the Inca was the growing of agriculture. And so they needed accurate calendars in order to be able to calculate from year to year, from place to place, how much productivity in terms of food was being done. Because having a huge food supply means that you can have an advanced civilization. So that will be the last aspect of what we'll look at here, my 61st visit to Machu Picchu. Okay, good. Our guide, Senor Felix. So the Intihuatana, or hitching post, again, the most famous feature here at Machu Picchu.
There'll be cameras everywhere, so they'll be controlled by this.
ancient megalithic site of Ollantaytambo, and here you will see two styles of construction. One being Inca, which is the more recent, and the other is the megalithic, because the Inca found the site of Ollantaytambo, and then they built their constructions. What you'll definitely see is that the oldest construction is far superior to that of the Inca, made by an unknown ancient civilization. Our guide today is local wisdom keeper Wilco Apasa from Cusco.
I explain in the spiritual explain, here. The question is, these big stones, is possible the Incas doing, or the other ancient civilization, right? Yeah, I perceive more tribe to the with what machines is possible to cut these rocks. No? Yeah.
So compared to other Inca locations where the foundation is megalithic, this is the opposite. That's the megalithic up there. See near the very top, and then lower down on the left you see repair work, and then all of this terracing stuff is all Inca. So the theory is that there was the most ancient construction was up there. Then there was a cataclysmic earthquake that caused all of this stone here to fall down. And so the broken pieces the Inca used for some of the walls and some of the staircases. So the most profound stuff we'll see is up on top there, the so-called Sun Temple. And the front and back walls are relatively intact, but the side walls, the earthquake came this way, east to west. So the side walls blew out and then tumbled down this side and then the other side. Yeah, well actually Ollantaytambo has a masculine aspect and a feminine aspect. So this mountain, this is the male part here. And then this whole thing here is the feminine. And it is kind of difficult. Well, what's obvious is you look on the right-hand side, you see that huge structure. That again was a storage facility for potatoes and corn because the wind always blows here so it air dries. And then on the left-hand side there, you see that other big building, which is the Temple of Viracocha. So that was a sacred site to the creator god called Viracocha. And what most people, it takes them a little bit of time to see, is right in between.
Is the little that little piece that juts out?
More. If you look down below that, you
Okay.
see it's the profile of a human face.
Oh.
So you see the eye, the nose is gone, the mouth is there.
His cheekbones are dark gray.
Right, and then
Yeah.
and then he has a little temple as a crown on top of him.
Oh.
So he's looking this way because he's the male protecting the female,
Okay.
and the female is productivity. All of the food, royal Inca food is produced here, and then taken up there in order to be stored. So this is called the Temple of the Chosen Women, or the Temple of the Virgins of the Sun. They were the most extreme example of the divine feminine. They prepared the food for the Inca. They knitted the Inca's clothes. They were the only ones who could physically come in contact with the high Inca people. The commoners were not allowed to touch them. And so this, you would think, for such important people, that the finest level of craftsmanship would have been done. But as you can see, it's adobe and stones and stuff. So this shows you that this is high-level Inca construction, which is not megalithic, which indicates to us that the megalithic is not Inca. But what's important here is that during winter solstice, the sun rises directly in this window. And so in here you have earth, air, fire, as in the sun, and then water. You have the four elements. So here you have standard Inca wall, and then strange cutouts in bedrock, which are inexplicable. So at winter solstice, the sun rises here and shines right there. So could that be for someone sitting and absorbing energy in a specific way? We're now heading towards what is called the Temple of the Condor, because there is the profile of a condor, natural of course, on the side of this mountain on the backside. This is interesting though, because this is another example of how the Inca recycled a site. They probably didn't they may have done this work, but maybe not. But at noon, around noon on winter solstice, the sun is right here, and it shines, casts a shadow on that knob there, and it goes right into that slot, right down there.
Really?
Yeah, because you can see the slot is not as well done as the knobs, but that's, they saw the effect happening and they went, oh, on this day this happens, let's cut a notch there. So that'll remind us of winter solstice.
Right.
I have to get my voice switch over.
Over on.
Yeah, against the wall. Over.
She's Irene, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Next to her.
So here we have a problem. If you could move that stone all the way from the quarry, why wouldn't you make this one fit with that one? Why would you fill in rubble like that?
Some design on the corner there.
So here at Ollantaytambo, you saw two very obvious styles of construction. And for those who have seen my videos before, I don't even have to tell you. But the inferior work was done by the famous and brilliant Inca culture, but the megalithic work was something they found in place when they discovered this site approximately 1,000 years ago. So the history of Peru is far older, far more complex, and far more fascinating than most people realize. And the same is true, of course, of Egypt. Before the dynastic Egyptians, there were the great builders who created the Giza pyramids as well as other structures. And now it's time for us to just wake up to that fact, that many academics have taught us history wrong, and that history has to be rewritten by those of us who are interested in the subject.
Sí, entonces esa. Ahí tenía la madre suficiente para construir todo. No dejaba de leer.
Familia, aquí en Ollantaytambo se suscitó una de las últimas batallas de Cabamba, el último refugio de los quechuas. La batalla de los quechuas que se ubica en la región más rural. Entonces aquí se suscitó.
Got you all. Got you.
Hey, Brian, no, Brian, sorry.
Yeah, got yourself all worked up.
Look at this. Look at this. This detail. Look at this. Quiero que veas esto, mira. What a detail. If they want, they could be straight, but they didn't. It's capricious. Look at this.
Pre-Incan.
Again?
Place the rocks and imagine trying to make that.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Now, some people think that that acoustic thing that we do is corny and it's new age and whatever. It's not. What it is doing, it is showing you that these recesses are tuned to a specific sound. Likely the sound ohm, and the vibration of the planet itself is several octaves below that. So Puma Punku, which is on the Altiplano in Bolivia. Elevation about 13,000 feet above sea level. And Puma Punku, the name itself, means the gate of the puma. Now, the name itself is Quechua, the language of the Inca. So the Inca likely named this place Puma Punku when they were here in the 15th century AD. Prior to the Inca, and actually living here to this very day, are the Aymara people. And they arrived here and kicked out the Tiwanaku people around 1000 AD. So conventional archaeologists believe that Puma Punku and Tiwanaku were both creations of the Tiwanaku culture, who arrived here at about 100 AD. However, I'll show you evidence that in fact the Tiwanaku people found Tiwanaku and Puma Punku in ruins, that these places are much, much older than being 2,000 years old, and were created using lost ancient high technology. The stonework you're looking at is quite refined. You can see that there's no mortar in any of the joints. The stones fit perfectly together, even after thousands of years of wear. Now this stone that you're looking at is red sandstone. It's not local. There is no local stone here at Puma Punku. In fact, the stone comes from a quarry 9 miles in that direction over those mountains. So that is quite an incredible feat, that the stone was cut and moved to this location from 9 miles away. The Tiwanaku people were at best a Bronze Age culture. So they did not have the capability of being able to cut and finally shape and fit these stones together using simple bronze tools. That's one factor that shows us that the site must be older than them, because the Aymara people who came later barely had Bronze Age tools. And then what is curious is this stone here, or actually this layer of stone. This is not the red sandstone. It in fact comes from much farther away. The gray stone, which has not been properly identified yet, some people call it diorite, some people call it andesite, but it doesn't seem to be either of those. It's from a completely different quarry located 70 kilometers away. And in this area here, in this construction, it's only one level. It's the 5th level. And the stone interlocks in with the other levels, which are made of the red sandstone. So what you can see here is that there are the gray stone blocks sticking out of the side of the wall, which is intriguing. The area where I'm walking was only excavated between 5 and 10 years ago. Prior to that, this whole area, all of the stonework was buried underground. So the question is, what happened here? There's convincing scientific data that this site was impacted by a giant wall of mud. And the question is when? Clearly it happened before the time of the Inca, before the time of the Aymara, and before the time of the Tiwanaku. Scientific evidence suggests that this event happened 12,000 years ago. And I know many of you won't accept that because you think the oldest civilization that we know of could be the Sumerians, dating back about 6,000 years. But there is convincing evidence that our planet was impacted by a massive cataclysm about 12,000 years ago. So any civilization existing at that time would have been destroyed, such as here at Puma Punku. So here again is where the layer of the gray stone is. It's quite magnetic. It contains magnetite, and so it reacts to a teslameter. And as you can see, that the stone actually, this is one piece of stone that was cut specially for this layer to interlock into. So the point being, if you were simply building a temple or some other quasi-pragmatic construction, why would you bother to bring stone from 70 kilometers away when there's abundant stone 9 miles away? And why is that gray stone only in one layer and not in another layer? What I'm suggesting to you is that the gray stone was very important for one reason, and that is its magnetic quality. If there was one layer of the gray stone that went all the way around this big structure, it would mean, quite possibly, that that would be a band of energy. And so the magnetic energy inside the temple structure would be different than the outside area. What that would have been used for specifically, I can't tell you. And that's why I continue to research this place. I've been here at least 40 times, and in the last 4 times is when we started to bring equipment that measures magnetics to see what anomalies are present here. This is Tiwanaku culture construction or reconstruction, and compare it with the original construction, which is far superior. So here we have a teslameter, and the ambient measurement in microteslas is about 24 microteslas. As we approach the stone, especially the gray stone, it's increasing up to 40, down to 34, 31, and back to ambient again. So we are measuring a difference between the ambient reading in microteslas and the gray stone. The gray stone has a higher reading, but this is not really profound in this area. When we visit other locations, especially where the famous H blocks are, we'll see a massive escalation in what the teslameter is reading. Now this staircase you can see, which is made up of red sandstone, has an incredible amount of weathering. And so is it possible that this weathering is thousands upon thousands of years old? Lake Titicaca stands behind me. It's about 7 miles from the back of my head, but 12,000 years ago the lake level was where I'm standing right now, right at the base of this staircase. So it is possible that 12,000 years ago, Puma Punku met Lake Titicaca, and you could literally sail from here north by more than 100 miles. And now we're going to head to the main part that has been excavated, and this is where we find the famous H blocks. There are 8, and no one knows originally how many there would have been. So these are the famous H blocks, and they display very interesting magnetic anomalies. So here we have a baseline reading of about 24 microteslas, and as we approach the H blocks, it goes up, and varies dramatically as we go along, dropping down to 19, up to 56, putting it inside, goes down to 9, back out, goes up to 32, so we're seeing a lot of variation in the magnetic field, and what it appears is that the shape of the H blocks themselves are dictating the magnetic field. So it's not simply that there is a deposit of magnetite in the stone itself, but the magnetism and the shape seem to go hand in hand, which is very intriguing. So clearly we're looking at something very sophisticated going on here. This is not the work of a Bronze Age culture that was simply building a temple of some kind. We're looking at a much older civilization that not only had lost ancient high technology to be able to achieve cutting the stone and actually cutting it from the quarry, moving it, setting it into place, and cutting the fine detail, but also the magnetic anomalies are clearly part of the design. But what was it that they had achieved in order to do that? And two more of the H blocks. The interesting thing here is that these are dovetail shapes. The size here is narrower than in the back. So they weren't simply making 90-degree angles, they were making far more complex angles than that. And one of the most intriguing stones that's here has a channel in it and holes drilled very evenly. And it, as well, has some incredible magnetic anomalies. And here the magnetometer is going absolutely crazy. It's measuring over 408 in this particular location. And here, in fact, the magnetometer has gone off the charts. The screen has turned red, meaning that it's measuring things higher than it possibly can. All of these stones are in situ, meaning that this is where they were found. So obviously some kind of cataclysm event happened here to cause this. It's likely that there's far more as well buried under our feet. The red sandstone does not show any reading with the magnetometer when we take it up to it, but the gray stone in almost all cases does. So again, I believe that they chose it on purpose for its magnetic properties, and we're likely trying to set up magnetic fields of some kind on the inside of this so-called temple.
Oh, did it not do it? Hey, that's pretty weird. Oh, there it goes. Yeah.
So it's causing the compass to flip?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's your compass normal.
Uh-huh.
And then when you put it down on here,
Yeah.
it flips it up. Completely.
And there you have it again. The compass, when it was held above that stone, measured the normal thing that it should, that a magnetic compass should do. As soon as it was placed down upon the stone, the needle flipped by 180 degrees. (1,370 microteslas in this little enclosure here. And now the machine has actually, or the app has stopped working. So the Tesla meter is now frozen at 1,370 microteslas. And I guess I'll have to turn it off and turn it on to see what's going on with that. But again, we're measuring incredible magnetic anomalies at this site of Puma Punku on the Altiplano of Bolivia. So we found evidence that there were at least 10 H blocks, and what you have to realize is that they are all slightly different in shape and size. So they were not cranked out in a factory, they were not poured into a mold, they were individually handcrafted and each slightly different. But the question is why? And it's not error, because the precision of the flat surfaces here are astonishing. Sometimes we find a virgin surface, which is one where the stone has either been buried or has been lying down for an extended period of time, protected from the weather. And measurements have been made that the flatness of the surface is within a few 10,000ths of being laser perfect. So you're not looking at the workmanship of a Bronze Age culture called the Tiwanaku here. Again, you're talking about the fact that the Tiwanaku culture discovered Puma Punku and Tiwanaku in ruins, buried by a massive mud wave that came from Lake Titicaca in behind. And that seems to be the story of this place. Never-ending fascination for me. Now, the theory behind the cataclysmic event is that Mount Kapia, which is 70 kilometers in that direction, may have erupted as the result of this massive cataclysm global of 12,000 years ago. It triggered itself back on, exploded possibly, debris fell into Lake Titicaca, created a mini tsunami. That tsunami spread from the north to the south and buried not only Puma Punku, but also the Akapana pyramid of Tiwanaku that's off in this direction. Now again, Tiwanaku and Puma Punku are the same place. It's just that when the Tiwanaku civilization arrived here 2,000 years ago, they found more above ground stone at Tiwanaku. So that's where they set up their ceremonial city, whereas it's likely that all of Puma Punku was buried underground, except maybe for a few stones projecting out of the ground. We've had many engineers accompany us here, as well as stonemasons, etc. None of them will accept the idea for 1 second that the Bronze Age Tiwanaku culture were responsible for this work. Some of them even suggest that some of this work would be very difficult to achieve now in the 21st century. So we have no choice but to accept the idea that whoever was here had astonishing capabilities of cutting stone from distant quarries, shaping them, bringing them here, and utilizing this site for an as yet unknown or as yet not fully known purpose. But now we know that magnetism was definitely a component of what they were working with. And if it takes me 50 more times to come back to Puma Punku, I will do so in order to try to figure out who built this and when. My guess again is more than 12,000 years ago, because the cataclysm that swept the planet happened 11,700 to 11,900 years ago. Damaged famous places we know of, such as Egypt. Many of the megalithic sites in Egypt, including the Great Pyramid Complex at Giza, are pre-dynastic Egyptian. The Egyptians arrived in that area 5,000 years ago, just like the Tiwanaku culture arrived here 2,000 years ago and found the remains of great builders. They were so astonished that, of course, they adopted the sites, venerated whoever it was that came first. But modern day academics are pretty well stuck in their conviction, and that is that there was no civilization prior to 6,000 years ago, that we started out as very primitive people living in small little groups. Gradually over time, villages formed, farming began, and around 6,000 years ago you have civilizations rising in the Indus Valley, also Sumeria, etc. However, that was likely a renaissance of culture. The cataclysm struck about 12,000 years ago. All of the civilizations were destroyed, or people were forced to scatter, and it took several thousand years ago for the redevelopment of civilization. So the last thing we're going to see today is what's called the Akapana Pyramid. It was a 7-tiered structure, and as you're about to see, it looks like it was hit by a cataclysmic ball of mud. The original bottom 2 levels have been exposed, but it took years of excavating in order to be able to find the original structure. So it's unlikely that it was dust from the air or a slow buildup of soil that caused the covering totally of the Akapana. More likely that it got hit by a giant wave of mud from Lake Titicaca, starting at Sarocapia, which supposedly is an extinct volcano, even though steam rose from it in the 1950s. It's quite possible that 12,000 years ago, when the cataclysm happened globally, the oceans of the Earth rose by 100 meters or more than 100 feet. That created a lot of pressure on the surface of the Earth, causing dormant earthquakes to erupt. That volcano may have erupted at that time, and then either a landslide coming down or an explosion from it created a little tsunami that then came south and covered Puma Punku and parts of Tiwanaku, such as the Akapana. Then 2,000 years ago, the Tiwanaku people arrive, they find it, and they recycle some of the stone for their own purposes, and that is my theory. And thank you for watching this video from the Altiplano of Bolivia, 13,000 feet above sea level. Thank you so much for buying or renting this video. I have a companion book about Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, covering the conventional history as well as the real history of this amazing ancient site in the windswept barren lands of the Altiplano of Bolivia. Okay, as an appendix we have to see the famous Gate of the Sun. Gracias. Once again, we're at Puma Punku on the Altiplano of Bolivia. This site was devastated in the distant past. You can see there's some stones that are still buried. And since the Tiwanaku civilization took over this location about 1,000 years ago, it started to be used as a quarry. And that continued up until the early part of the 20th century.
I'm not looking for treasures. I'm looking for the knowledge, what happened with Tiwanaku. So I got 20 of this study, including pyramids. I'm not allowed to tell where the pyramid is, but this is the work, scientific work we did for many years, and I'm very glad. Maybe it wasn't the time when they kick us off from the archaeology place, because we got this information. Nobody did get inside since the destruction of Tiwanaku. And we just have to dig 1.5 meters, and we can get in the chamber. It gotta be the big skeletons, pottery, gold, of course, and all those things. But the most important, we have to decode what's inside here. It's very important to know what we got here.
So, as Antonio was saying, 1.5 meters below this site, there are chambers, because they did testing with ground-penetrating radar. This is possibly, or this is, the largest slab which is left. It's made of red sandstone and weighs more than 100 tons. The location of the quarry is 8 miles over those mountains. And these are some of the famous, excuse me, H blocks. 4 located here, and 2 located there, and 2 more located here. And here we have the interesting left arrow sign. It is unique at this location. So there are 9 H blocks in total. It's quite possible that there may have been a few more, but unlikely many more, because the H block is a weird shape. And the construction of the little town of Tiwanaku over here, which is partially composed of stone from Puma Punku and Tiwanaku. We don't see any evidence of H blocks there. So the idea that it was some kind of ramp for a rocket ship, or that it was a giant wall, is highly unlikely. But if there were only 9 H blocks, what was the function? And again, these massive sandstone blocks. Now what we see here is a lot of erosion of the surface because of course this part of this stone was exposed, but the area underneath was buried and therefore it is still pristinely flat. And when I say flat, excuse me, I mean extremely flat, as in almost laser flat. So clearly, some kind of devastating event happened here, and most likely prior to 1000 AD when it was discovered by the Tiwanaku civilization, because, again, some of these stones were buried underground. But what kind of cataclysm could it be? Or could it have been? Likely, it was a tsunami that came from Lake Titicaca, which is approximately 7 miles in that direction, and a wall of mud came and buried this site that we call Puma Punku. As you can see, stones protruding from the wall, obviously buried by some cataclysmic event. So we have two forms of technology that were employed here. One of them did the roughing work. You see the rounded corner here, like that. And then another machine came here and produced the flat surface. That's what nobody else except me, I believe, shows, is that this H block here was never completed, because the rounded corner is here, the sharp corner is here. In a finished H block, you have the crisp corner. And as engineer Chris Dunn noted, this shape is a dovetail. This distance is greater than this distance. And each H block has a unique shape and size, a unique dimension. No two are the same. This is obvious when we go behind it and look. You see, no two are the same. And again, with the backs of these two H blocks, that one, and then this one. There is no other site, no other location on planet Earth that looks like Puma Punku. It is nothing like what we see in Cusco, the Sacred Valley, and Machu Picchu. So whoever created it quite possibly only came to this location and produced here, which is very strange. It was not the Tiwanaku culture that did this work. It's an unknown civilization. The problem is that in the early 20th century, when they were building the local train track, they used dynamite and they blew up parts of Puma Punku in order to create the rail bed, thereby destroying a lot of the evidence. And as you've seen over there, they've lined all of the stones up in rows. So we have no idea where the original location of those stones were. We don't know where the H blocks, for example, originally were located. They were highly unlikely to have been in a row like that. And that's part of the problem with trying to decode Puma Punku. Also, 90% of the people who go and visit Tiwanaku, which is over there, never come here and explore Puma Punku because all they see is a pile of stones. Their curiosity is not strong enough to notice the H blocks and then come over here and explore. So this is the original foundation of Puma Punku, and as you can see, clearly excavation had to be done in order to expose it. So it was buried underground, again, most likely by an ancient cataclysm. Levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the limestone, the red sandstone. Level 5 is the gray andesite. No mortar or any kind of filler used in the foundation. All originally very tightly fitting together. Again, you see where it was buried. And then excavated. So again, the red sandstone is from a quarry 8 miles off in this direction, whereas the gray andesite is from a volcano 45 miles in that direction. The red sandstone is not magnetic or does not respond to either a compass or a Tesla meter, but the gray andesite does. It's not uniform. It's not that each of the andesite blocks has the same reading on the Tesla meter. The surfaces and the angles seem to have a relationship with magnetic fields, which is really quite intriguing. We find no art in the original work here. The Tiwanaku culture carved images like bird men, etc. on different surfaces, but whoever the original builders were, they did not employ what we call art. They created for function, and we'll see that when we go to Tiwanaku. You'll see beautiful flat surfaces, such as the sun gate, which were carved onto in a superficial manner by the Tiwanaku civilization, who discovered the destroyed remains of a megalithic complex here at 13,000 feet in the Andes region, the Altiplano of Bolivia, 7 miles from Lake Titicaca.